morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink. It's June 25th, 2021. It's This Week in XR. Ted's out of touch today, so I'm here with John Canning, our friend from Digital Domain. He's an executive producer working on amazing immersive projects that we'll get to in a few minutes, but he's going to run through the news with me this morning because Ted is incommunicado.
I didn't know that was actually possible for Ted, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, Ted has been always on for the past 25 years.
Incommunicado, it's like he must be under a rock on the other side of the moon.
That's right, held hostage by his wife.
I find it highly suspicious.
Possibly with his mobile device stuffed down his throat. Who knows? All right, you ready? We're going to run through the news. So, this week, Facebook ran an experiment in a game called Blastron, for which they were mightily blasted by the press and roasted by users in social media. So kudos to Facebook for teaching us a few things. One is just how early it is for them to be running interruptive ads. I mean, as many people point out, it's inevitable. Just like mobile, where we pay with attention if we're not willing to pay for a game, that's going to be part of VR. And if you don't like that, like me, I steer away from those kinds of games. So, but it shows how hard the transition is for early users who get a lot of value without paying for it. And so at some point you have to eat ads, but I do agree the kind of ads really matter. And if you think about it like TV or like the web, you're really going to get it wrong. And I think that's what happened here. You've got to think spatially. Fortnite does a good job of this, right? Because they make the brand promotion part of the game.
Yeah, I think look, I mean, on one side of me, I was like, well, duh. How do people think that Facebook pays for its business? I mean, right? Like it's like, yeah. As much of an organization, and you might want to think they're, trying to be altruistic or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's a company, and they've, somebody's looking at it going, we have eyeballs and we need to monetize those eyeballs, which is unfortunate because a lot of the folks that have come up in this industry, right? Like it's been a bubble. It's almost like a safe space because nobody's been paying attention.
True. I do think that there is we need to distinguish between display advertising and the kind of advertising, which really isn't too bad. We don't complain about Twitter putting promoted content into the news feed. It's just part of the experience. So
I mean, look, I don't know how many times, in the early days of streaming media portals, so take an early Hulu or an early NBC, and the ham-fisted ad insertion done with an axe, right? Yeah. Like you've been watching a TV show and then it would like some weird moment in this commercial would be like shoved in the side and you're
I mean, that's it. Quibi is an example of that. They were just going to force you to eat a lot of advertising, even if you paid them.
Some of it's the platforms, right? And some of it, what I do find is amazing is we don't learn. You would think as we progress as humans and technologists,
but partly it's because it's being run by a whole new generation of people, and every generation gets to make its own mistakes.
and if you're not paying, I say this all the time, is sadly get to be resident old fart in the room sometimes. I'm like, if you don't pay attention to history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Although I heard Philip Rosedale, who founded Second Life, said he would never make anything today without 20-year-olds in the room. So there needs to be a balance. And I mean, they just on this one, it'll be back. This issue's not going away.
No.
So now we've got Tencent puts 50 million into Ultraleap. Now, Ultraleap was the company that was formed by, I believe, Ultra Haptics and Leap Motion.
Yeah,
Leap Motion made that early, binocular thing you glued to your headset so that you could have hand tracking.
I think I've got one somewhere around here, but I mean,
it's in my closet full of forgotten toys. But it was pretty amazing and magical technology in 2015. I'm not quite sure what Tencent is up to. They know way better than me. But isn't everybody using this technology through outward facing cameras? Do they still have a secret sauce?
Well, I think there's some IP, like you said, is that the company is a combination of a couple of different companies. Haptics one, which haptics is still, it's the rumble and your joystick is the predominant haptics.
Yeah.
But the hand sensing, there's various IP flowing around, like Quest has it, right?
Right, exactly.
But some other headsets, they may not have that attached. So the question is are they looking to bring some of that into other headsets?
I see that they're working with Varjo, which just made an interesting announcement this week about pass-through AR, or pass-through truly mixed reality, which is, of course, instead of seeing the physical world through a glass and having the graphics projected on there, it's actually done in a live mix inside of your headset or inside of the cloud. You need super fast connection to do that, so that there's absolutely zero latency. Otherwise, I think you'd fall right over.
Well, it's super fast connection. I mean, it's
the live mix of reality is such a compelling idea, though.
It's my rant about the continuum of opacity, right? Like you got AR over here and you got VR over here, and it's just a slider of opacity. And the problem is we have some devices that are over here or some devices over here, but we live in a world that is much more.
I think that's going to change, honestly, because, for example, the Nreal glasses, which have not yet launched in the US, but they tether to a smartphone. And if you want to do VR, you just clip down a visor. The same thing is true, by the way, of the new Campfire device. You clip on an occlusive cover, and now you're in VR. So I think that's where we're headed, right?
It's contextual, right? Like it's what point in life. I flew last night for the first time in God knows how long, and it was a late flight, and you do want that moment where I just want everything, I'm just going to zone out and go into my own universe. But I think, I've run the inside out camera, the outside in cameras on the Quest just to find my coffee cup. And still you've got the compositing, it's not only low latency, but the clean compositing of that information. But then it's also the perception, right? Like the optics aren't quite right yet. So I reach out to grab my coffee cup, and it's still, my hand and my camera aren't the same place.
We'll see what happens with the Pro 3. I think they may start leaning into this. And, they're doing this with very high-end Varjo, high resolution headsets. So that means that, in a few years, that's going to be in the Oculus Quest and similar low-cost devices, I hope. So from the sublime to the ridiculous, there's a startup called Trip. They have an app actually in the Quest store and also on Steam that allows you to have a psychedelic experience without taking any psychedelics. So have you done this?
Are you asking if I've done psychedelics? No.
No. It was so long ago, I don't really remember if I did or not.
That is my story. I don't remember, Your Honor. I cannot recall, actually. I played with it early on. And it's funny because they call it Calm Reimagined, right? Because Calm is like the bust out success of the pandemic from an app standpoint. And this is, I know the folks behind this, and they first described it, and I was like, the first statement fits in there. Are you high? But then,
wait, do you know Blortasia by Kevin Mack, the 2001 special effects guy? He made one of the first VR quote unquote experiences, and you're like floating through this world of blobs. I always think of that as the psychedelic VR experience?
I mean, I've had a lot of psychedelic VR experiences that I'm not sure were intended to be psychedelic, but you're kind of like, that's, I mean, and if you think about a lot of the VR art projects and things like that, it's, what is it, that tripping, that psychedelic that's going through different worlds. A buddy of mine produced in 2017, he did, I think there were 5 art pieces in VR that were all, like Beeple was one of them actually, VR art, featuring something about Vegas, like, and all of it was crazy, fanciful VR related. And I'm like, well, that was trippy. But I love these guys of just, and like I said, if you'd have run up to me and said, would calm be the thing before the pandemic, I've been like, but people are like really needing that escape and finding this way. So good on them.
So do you know what Decentraland is?
Oh yeah.
Decentraland just sold a plot for $900,000. Now, I know a lot of this is kind of crypto money, but $900,000, which is really,
that's like living here in
bet
Santa
on
Monica.
Artur Sychov.
That's crazy. It's like living here in Santa Monica.
Yeah, I mean, you paid $900,000. How about setting up your own server?
Well, yeah. I mean, so God, I've known the Decentraland folks for a while, and I get it. I mean, it's sort of the blockchain meets Second Life.
Yeah.
I don't mean to degrade either one of
No,
those.
but they're browser based.
That's right.
So, I'll give them that. Anybody can get in there with a PC.
But I missed the plot. What was the plot? Like that's some prime real estate.
Yeah, 900,000. Well, apparently it's a large plot that they're going to develop.
This is when, art imitates reality or whatever, right? Like some developers.
It worked in Second Life, though. In fairness, Second Life has an economy worth $600 million, and they've got, almost 1 million monthly returning users.
That's right.
And something like 200,000 simultaneous during the day, which is, much more than most TV channels. Yeah,
and it's an economy that unto its own and continues to grow. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because it sort of goes into some of the other articles that you point out, because there's the whole metaverse, and everybody's doing their own metaverse, and right. And that brings me to Engage. The company is called VR Education Holdings. They're a tiny company worth less than $50 million that is listed on the Irish exchange. It's run by David Whalen and Sandra Whalen, who are XR developers. They did the Apollo 11 interactive thing that has been everywhere since, I don't know, 2016. Yeah. And they built this platform for remote collaboration and large scale, fully embodied VR conferences and training. And I use it as a classroom. I teach several XR classes at Chapman, and I use it as a platform and drag my students in there and lecture them about VR, because you gotta walk the walk. And of course, we were uniquely suited in a class about VR to be remote this past year. So I like Engage, but then they announced, so I liked Engage the way Engage was. I thought that was a business that, at that minuscule price, someone is going to snap up. Yeah, they have an investment from HTC. They're fairly visible. You can't acquire Verbella. They're now too valuable. So if I was Zoom or somebody, I'd be like, this is kind of a good business for us to be in. Yeah. And they announced that they're gonna try and create a LinkedIn type world. So, there's a world where you get, I don't know, a space, an apartment, a room, sort of like Rec Room. And then it's, there's a downtown with companies in. Yeah. And so, that's their thesis, that people will go there, they'll check LinkedIn when they're in VR the same way we check LinkedIn when we're checking our email.
But it's a big pivot for them, even though they just got $10 million to do it. And,
I mean, but one could argue that it's a pivot to make them more, I mean, to your point, I agreed with you that like they were primed for an acquisition by somebody who needed that. And yeah, I still remember the days when, oh shoot, now I forget the guys. They called themselves the 360 of YouTube, the YouTube 360 platform. And then YouTube released 360.
Within.
Star, Little Star.
Bright Star.
No, the Little Star guy. The Little
Star. That's
right. Little Star guys were calling themselves the 360 YouTube. And I went, and that was great until YouTube released a 360. And then you're like, and it's interesting that they're saying LinkedIn. It's like, they could be going, look at us, Microsoft. Hey, like don't build it yourself.
Yeah.
But what's funny is all these little, like, would you go there and be in that metaverse, right? Everybody's got their own metaverse to check the LinkedIn, like what would be my motivation for going into that universe? I'm like,
I guess it's the same as LinkedIn, but
I too used Engaged. I never ran a class with it, but I attended some of the early conferences. And as with all these platforms, right, the pandemic made them grow up quickly, right? Like suddenly the harsh light of you're not ready for prime time, you've got to go do this for real came on. And I could see in these conference platforms, how do you exchange a business card? Right? Like the thing we're used to doing is meeting at something and chatting and maybe exchanging a business card or something. And first thing you do when you go home is you go look them up on LinkedIn and add them on LinkedIn and toss out the business card. Oh, wait, maybe that's just me. But
so listen, we're going to run short on time. And all the other stories, a couple of other fundraising stories and more about Varjo and Tech C, which is AR and computer vision customer service with smartphones, which is another thing which I always thought they're not already doing that. It's like somebody raised money for building navigation training in the Air Force, and I'm like, wait, they're not already doing that.
I am amazed at the number of those sort of calls for proposals that I've seen. That I'm like, wait a minute. You're asking for that now? Like
exactly. Well, I mean, it just goes to show you our fantasies about the Defense Department and Defense Department contracting may not be exactly accurate. And the HoloLens implementation for the military notwithstanding, that's a pretty interesting story. We were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, right? I mean, this might be the ideal use for the HoloLens, identifying friendlies and calling in airstrikes.
Well, with the funny part, that contract first was with Osterhaus. Remember the
yes, R.I.P. Osterhaus.
Yeah, and they had a great device, and they were deployed in the field in where that's what they were. I mean, they were using it for.
My thesis about ODG is they got a $50 million investment from Fox and went in exactly the wrong direction.
Where is Ted? Oh, wait, Ted's not.
Oh yeah, no. Ted is one of the featured culprits in that story, which just goes to show you that I didn't think it was the idea that people may want to watch the baseball game in glasses or with a micro display. But as it turns out, that's not as good as watching it on a smartphone. So another great invention that nobody needed.
I often say that if we relied on entertainment to save this medium, we should take it out back and shoot it in the head.
Exactly.
Right? Like
so we're into the last 10 minutes of the show, and you originally were going to be here as our special guest talking about digital domain and the general direction of XR here in Hollywood land. So thank you, first of all, for taking the time to come on the show. You were an admirable stand-in for Ted, and certainly have given me plenty of extra material to taunt him with.
Good.
But let's talk about digital domain, because the last time you and I talked, which was probably 25 years ago, Digital Domain was still thinking maybe computer games would be a big business. Yeah. So you have been around before the beginning, my friend.
But before the beginning of time, and I have to say, I love it because Digital Domain, the number of people that I know that were at Digital Domain and now out in the world, like there's actually a whiskey drinking crew that I'm part of that is like all XDD people for the most part.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's turning into like Imagineering, a great place to have been.
Right. And look, I mean, I think over 28 years in the visual effects business says something. And I have not been there that long, certainly. And it's kind of funny because I came to DD about 3 years ago, and my job is like, I call myself the executive producer of not film, not television, not commercials. Right. I am applying the visual expertise, the visual effects expertise of this company to all the other mediums. And it's somebody was like scratching their head and they're like, oh, XR. And it's like, no. It's high-end CG, that's what visual effects is. And, while film and television and people have always expected the high fidelity, the amazing explosions. I like to say the VFX business is all about, if we do our job right, you never knew we did our job. Right. All of that is starting to migrate into
the hardest things seem like they just happened.
They just happen. Like, I often do a talk and I'll use a clip out of Ready Player One where Wade is putting on the headset, that scene where he puts on the headset and dives into the oasis.
Yeah.
That's a digital head of Wade. Yeah. And most people will never see it, recognize it that way because it wasn't meant to. But if you think about it, that shot is impossible to do with a regular.
Because you have to go inside of his head and then
you have to go inside his head. So you don't want people to think, wow, that's a really tough shot, unless you're in Hollywood and you do this for a living.
Right.
You just want it to seamlessly flow. So I come out of the immersive interactive business. I'm not the VFX guy, right? I'm the go build cool interactive experiences.
So what's the coolest recent project you've worked on?
Oh, that's a fun one. Even over the course of the pandemic, there's been a couple of milestones over this past year that were like, well, we managed to ship that. Beginning of last year, going into creating a XR experience for a museum around Dr. Martin Luther King and the Day of the March. And a lot of challenges, a lot of tech, craziness, doing an LBE, but creating Dr. King, a historical recreation of Dr. King. A lot of people's, I'm in the business of digital humans. And
so you created a digital twin, presumably from stills and other composites of.
So we
historically,
when you create a digital human, and if you ran up to me and said, I want to create a digital human, I start with the question of, are they alive or dead? Kind of, it gets weird.
Really. In other words, is somebody avatteering it in real time, or is it going to be driven like an NPC or with some kind of basic AI? Or
see, I mean, creating humans is hard, right? Humans do human really well. You do you really well. To recreate you, I'm going to try to work with as much material as I can. And because you're alive and kicking in there, I'm going to say, I want to scan you. And then preferably, I'd like to scan you without this, although it's very attractive and very signature for you. I'd like to scan that because I want to get all of your face structure. I want to get all of that. But if you're not alive, if I don't have you, then it's a process of reconstructing from material we've got. And then what I'm going to probably do is I'm going to find somebody that has your head structure, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan them and then I'm going to mold that.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. So you start with kind of a template that's ish, and then you start to sculpt like you're a sculptor.
If you think about it, I can give you a lump of clay and say, make something, or I can give you something that's sort of on its way and say, finish it, right? Because this business is all about how do you get to that end point. And when you're trying to make photoreal digital characters, there's a lot of work involved. And, Dr. King and faithfully recreating Dr. King. I mean, there wasn't any interpretation. It was trying to create a 3D color moment of something you've always seen in black and white and 2D, unless you were there that day. And so creating that experience, which is, I often say, and again, going back to, VR and entertainment, what I find is this medium is so useful in those things that aren't just about entertainment. It's the ability to immerse somebody in a historical moment in time and kind of put you there as best as we can. It just, my mind started going, we could create this.
I actually think that time travel is going to be one of VR's killer apps.
100%. Travel and time travel, right? And people saw it in the pandemic. The ability to take you to a location on the planet that right now you can't go because
well, right, because there was what I call a scarcity of presence. Right.
Nice. You write books, don't you? I can tell. That's like a chapter or something.
Well, I have to say these things over and over again. So when I get a clever turn of phrase, I keep it.
It's the, as Dr. Fink was saying, scarcity of presence.
So getting back to Dr. King, how can people see the simulation that you created?
Okay, so that's been the challenge, right? Like, there's some other cool stuff that went on and throughout the course of that. 2 weeks into the museum being open in March last year, boom. So mothballed, right? And the problem was it was designed as a museum experience to begin with. The whole design, like, a couple of years going into it.
But don't you just pick up where you left off? Museums are opening up. So presumably they're programming again.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is that it's then picking back up there. But the interesting thing is, there was a whole bunch of firsts we did. We were doing a.
So wait, who's the underwriter, right? Because digital domain is.
No. So that was a good question. So time, very important here. Time, and American Farmers Insurance put it together. Right? Okay. We did it at the behest of Time. Came to us.
Well, aren't they in charge of its distribution? Didn't you already do your part of the job?
Yes, but right. If you go into the technical side of it, and if you think about a year in time, if you had a bunch of Windows servers driving that experience on the Vive Focus Plus wirelessly a year and a half ago, I will let you guess how many of those things are either outdated, need updating, or no longer supported.
Oh God.
So and if it's sitting there for a year and no one's touching it, however, trust me, there's plans afoot and thoughts of, because this is what, anytime you're on that bleeding edge of technology.
So there's value there and people are going to want to see it. It's just a question now of who's going to pick things back up and start pushing it forward, right? Because these things, whether they're commercial or whether they're a public service, they succeed because there's one passionate person who's pushing it through. So
mark my words, there are ways. And look, the progress of technology, the one thing we wanted to do with that experience that wasn't there then, that is more so now, is edge computing, wireless support of headsets.
Edge meaning you could offload a lot of the computing to the cloud.
Right. And so what we did, that experience was a set of servers in the closet wirelessly driving the experience to the Vive Focus Plus, which, by the way, all of that was in beta and experimental.
Yeah.
If you're thinking of where we're at with the Focus 3 is out, the Quest 2, then thinking of where my compute power and rendering power, so pixel streaming is a lot better now. Yeah. All of these things can start going to that next set of experiences. It points to that point in time where we're at in technology, that if you're on the bleeding edge, it's going to evolve.
So let's take that as a pivot in our last few minutes of this conversation, to get your thoughts on where we're headed. Where do you think we'll be, let's say, in 3 years, and where do you think we'll be in 7 years? Now, adjusting the 5 and 10 years.
Thank you.
However you want to frame it. You and I have been carried along this river for some time, and we have a sense of where we're going, I think. What is your perspective on this?
I'll use a couple of points in just the last year to move us to that point. I talked about Dr. King. I talked about creating a 3D representation of him very hard. Dial 6 months, 8 months past to that, and we did a project where we de-aged David Beckham back to his current age for a campaign for Malaria No More, right? what I loved is I bookended my year with 2 projects that were doing something important. And I was like, yes. Malaria No More, David Beckham's a spokesperson for that. It's a PSA, very, you don't know about malaria and the devastation in the world it causes. But we used a neural rendering technology, a face swapping technology on that, where we didn't create a digital David. And getting a fidelity with some of those new tools beyond what we're doing with just creating a 3D character, the tool set already in a year to faithfully recreate a human in a digital fashion is advancing so fast. Now, it scares people, 100%. But what I point out to is we're getting better and better at making those digital characters that then you can draw. So you take that and you take the acceleration in game engine that we've seen over this year, right? Like just the sheer craziness of virtual production and digital humans and what can we do with a game engine? 3 years out, I am so excited about having the moment where you can have the fidelity of video, 4K, 8K video, and the interactivity of the engines here. Because the storytelling we can do at that point is crazy, right? If you think about it, we can shoot that, we're gonna have to reshoot that, we have to get the actor back, and all of those things start to morph and change because we're leveraging what we've seen in the game world, that interactivity, that ability to tell the story from all these different camera angles, to be a different character like that. With the fidelity of what we see. And that's where we're, 3 years, we're doing some of that stuff. Being the community, are doing some of that stuff now. We're all just pushing the edge, right? You and I talked about headsets earlier. Let's face it, there's still sweaty boxes on face, but it's getting better, right? Like the Unreal glasses are comfortable. It's like, so for me, the 3 year out and 7, I'll be teaching like you and, hopefully writing pithy statements.
That's where everybody goes for the third act of their career.
I'm there. I'm already guest lecturing. I'm like,
I look like the professor from Central Casting, so they sent me there.
I'm with you, man. I'm joining you. I don't know if I can do that facial hair, but
well, let me just say this about the facial hair. If I had the kind of hair on the top of my head that you have, I wouldn't need it.
Fair. You put us. Actually, that's the great part about it. The tech is going to put the two of us together, and we'll just look amazing.
Exactly.
But that's
John. Yeah, John Canning from Digital Domain. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You did an admirable replacement for Ted Schilowitz. We'll have to see about sending him on vacation more often and having you back. That's it, everybody. That's our show for this week. See you next Friday, perhaps with the virtual Ted Schilowitz. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks.